Welcome to the third session of Sarum Seminar for this season. We are very pleased this evening to welcome back Professor Elaine Treharne of Stanford University's English Department. As you know, because she's spoken to us before and is going to again after this even, her research is centered on medieval manuscripts. And I'm pleased to announce right now that she's going to come talk to us again in the fall because her latest book on the subject will be coming out. And so she's going to give us a talk on her research and that book. You will also remember the last time she spoke to us, it was about the collaboration between Stanford University libraries and Salisbury Cathedral so that the manuscripts and records of the cathedral could be digitized. And that's an ongoing project that I hope we'll be able to ask her about in the Q&A. Her talk tonight, as you know, focuses on St. Nicholas and how he has become one of the most popular, shall we say, popular saints, as well as a totally iconic figure in so many cultures. And she's also going to tell us, and this is going to be fascinating, on how she sees him as a saint for this era of living our lives virtually by Zoom. And we probably could all use a saint right about now. So Elaine, please.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Anne. I'm going to try and share my screen, so I hope I've got privileges to do that. Yes,
you do.
Fine. Thank you. I've got to tell you, I've got to begin with an apology, really. Actually, let me just backtrack. I'm not apologizing for being here. I'm so pleased to be here. It's lovely to see lots of old friends, Julia and Bob especially, at this almost festive season. So I'm really delighted to have had the chance to come and talk to you. And I did try and get out of talking about St. Nicholas and said, can I talk about my new book this time? And even said, it's the season for jolliness, so we'll talk about St. Nicholas. And this is the apology. I think I've gone slightly overboard. So I've got a lot of slides and I may end up kind of zooming through them, but I do know how varied your interests are, from church architecture to art history to textual studies. And so I've got a little bit of everything in here. And there are also some incredible websites, and I'm happy to kind of share bibliographic material with you if that's useful. And really what's quite interesting to me is I did my PhD at the University of Manchester just a short time ago, and it was on a 12th century manuscript in Cambridge, and I edited 3 of the saints' lives in that manuscript. The Life of St. Margaret, the Life of St. Giles, and the Life of St. Nicholas. And that came out, that was my first book in 1997. So Nicholas is a very dear saint to me. Of course, it was his feast day yesterday on December the 6th. And lots of cultures, especially Northern European cultures, they celebrate December the 6th. And it's probably why he's become so closely associated with Christmas, is because his own feast day is at this time of year. So what again is really interesting to me is when I did my PhD, I worked on this Old English life of St. Nicholas, and it derives from a Latin life, and the Latin life itself derives from a Greek life. And there are lives in practically every sort of Eastern and Western European language from the medieval period, especially the High Middle Ages. The amount of effort I had to go to at that point to track down sources and resources. So I had to go through many volumes of the Bollandists' work, you know, containing all of the lives of saints. I had to go through many volumes of Latin and Greek catalogue materials from libraries around, particularly sort of Italy and the Eastern Mediterranean. And it took me, you know, more than a year of intense research to do the background on the life of St. Nicholas at that time. And now, in the course of the last sort of 2.5 weeks while I've been thinking about this, just, you know, it is a click, and you're down the rabbit hole, and the books are digitized, and the recent Google books are out, and it's just absolutely incredible to have everything at your fingertips. but also really alarming because you tend to pull all this stuff in. And I've spent quite a lot of time trying to organize this, and I'm not sure if I've been that successful. And as soon as I stop talking, you'll be able to judge whether I've been successful or not. So it's really incredible the amount of things that we can find out about St. Nicholas just online. And that is particularly handy as we think about these pandemic days when we're stuck indoors or just in the locality. So this is St. Nicholas, of course, in this icon. I've got a few of my own icons of the saint with me. This is, I can't remember quite where I bought this, actually. It's quite likely to have come from Florida, as I'll tell you about later. He is my absolute favourite saint, and some really beautiful sort of shiny gold ones. That one's from Cyprus. He is the wonder worker and the gift giver then, and he is, of course, our modern day Santa Claus, St. Nicholas. He's patron saint of Greece. This is just a handful of the things he's patron saint of. Greece and Russia, Sicily and Apulia, Lorraine in the Low Countries. He's patron saint of children, sailors, pawnbrokers, prostitutes, students, repentant thieves, charitable fraternities and guilds, unmarried women, the hungry, and then a host of other unfortunates. So he is a saint who I think possibly more than any other saint, with the exception of some of the apostolic saints, who appeals to everybody and to whom everyone can appeal. So he is a remarkable saint. But the question really is, I think, for tonight, what do we know about him, and how did he become Father Christmas, and in what way does he suit our kind of virtual times? So what do we know about him then? Well, it is likely that he did exist, and I'll tell you about some very early historical material that attests to this. Many of the saints are really in the shadows, and some of the saints are almost certainly sort of fabricated, especially in terms of the events surrounding their lives. And St. Giles, one of the other saints that I worked on, was probably more or less sort of made up. St. Margaret too has become an apocryphal saint, although she's still venerated. But Nicholas almost certainly did exist historically, and he's from modern day Turkey. So he's from the province of Lycia in Anatolia in modern day Turkey, and he was born in Patara. And then he became bishop, actually Archbishop of Myra, which is now called Demre, which, if you've ever been to Turkey and you flew into Antalya, it's really very close. It's within a couple of hours of that airport. It's a very popular tourist destination now. And so he's a Turkish saint in his origin, and he was born around 270 AD, and he died in around 343. So he existed through the persecutions of the Emperor Diocletian. It's possible that he was imprisoned at this time. And then after the Roman Empire was Christianized by Constantine, to whom Nicholas appeared in a vision, Nicholas came out. He came out of the state of persecution and was able to retain his episcopal see and get on with his miraculous work in that see. So that's sort of what we know about him. It is said that he was present at the Council of Nicaea in 325, I think it is 325 AD, and it is said that at that council he slapped Arius, who was the progenitor of the Arian heresy, which denies the unity of substance of God and Christ. I'm not very good at pronouncing what that's called in Greek. It's homoousis. And there's a joke, there's a meme that circulates on social media about St. Nicholas as the upholder of homoousius, ha ha, ho ho ho, Father Christmas. So various memes circulate about this event that took place in 325, if it indeed took place, because Nicholas appears in some of the lists of those who attended the Council of Nicaea, but not all of the lists. So it's a little bit difficult to know whether or not that is actually true. But he died in 343 or thereabouts, and very quickly after his death, really. So within that same century, and certainly by the early 5th century, his cult was established in Lycia, and his church, of course, and I wonder if any of you have been there, and I hope if you have, you'll tell us about it. His church still exists in what is now Demre, formerly Myra. Of course, it's a large proportion of the church is 12th century, and also kind of preserved because it's now a World Heritage Site and attracts many hundreds of thousands of visitors every year. But the fact that his church dates all the way back to at least the 6th century and probably earlier, with a shrine and attestation of his cult there, does suggest that this whole story of St. Nicholas is based on historical truth and has taken on much larger connotations, but nevertheless. Now, we know that the cult was established by the 6th century because of the life of St. Nicholas of Zion. And Zion is itself a monastery that Nicholas founded, or his uncle, who's also called Nicholas, founded this monastery of Zion in Lycia. And so Nicholas of Zion is probably called Nicholas because of Nicholas of Myra, our saint. And in the life of St. Nicholas of Zion, which is a 6th century, almost contemporary life of Nicholas of Zion, we learn that he visited Nicholas of Myra's shrines, both at Myra and in other places in Lycia during his lifetime. So Nicholas of Zion's life can be used to testify to the establishment of the cult of St. Nicholas of Myra. And in also testifying to Nicholas's cult is the building of a church in Constantinople, which we think was as early as 490 AD. So all very early, all very not actually contemporary accounts, but contemporary in terms of the lifespan of a cult. So very early kind of establishment of the cult of St. Nicholas of Myra. And this is the interior of the church, which, as you can see, is a lot of the work is 12th century, including the cosmati floors. And there are frescoes and other artistic works within this church, which is now really a sort of museum, I suppose. In the life of St. Nicholas of Zion, this 6th century life, I would say probably 1 in 4 characters is called Nicholas, so it becomes very difficult to untangle what's going on. And indeed, in one episode in that life, there are 4 different Nicholases, all kind of confusing the issues. But Nicholas of Zion's life is very important because in that life, we learn about Nicholas of Zion's own ability to perform miracles, to do, especially with calming stormy seas and taking care of sailors. And so the lives of Nicholas of Myra and Nicholas of Zion are likely to have become conflated. And it's interesting to think about, which influenced which. St. Nicholas of Myra, of course, really took off in the 9th and 10th centuries, when the first full life of the saint was written by a guy called Michael the Archimandrite in the Eastern Church. And that was picked up by somebody in Naples, obviously the kind of crossroads of the East and the West in southern Italy there, John the Deacon, who wrote the first full life of Nicholas in about circa 880. Now, from Nicholas of Zion, then, we have this story right in the middle of the screen here, as I'm waving my cursor. He's got his saintly attribute here. It's not a mandala. I'm just going to call it a halo because my mind's gone blank. He's attending to. There's 3 separate issues, 3 separate episodes, of the fresco in the church at Myra. 3 separate episodes containing Nicholas's figure, as you can see in the red sort of chasuble, always holding a book in his left hand, often veiled with his garment. And then he's here in the boat with these sailors whom he's saving from stormy seas or from the demon, because there's a number of episodes with him saving sailors in boats. And again, he's got his jewel encrusted gospel book here in his left hand. And he's often shown with a crozier, the bishop's kind of token, in his right hand. And it's this story in particular, the one with the sailors, as I say, that is influenced possibly by the life of Zion. And it's these episodes of the sailors and then raising people from, sort of resuscitating people or saving impoverished people. These form the kind of core episodes of the saint's life, Saint Nicholas of Myra, from the later 9th century onwards. So the church at Myra, Demra now, this early church with later architectural features, shows us these various episodes in these damaged frescoes around the walls. And this is probably, we're looking at here, probably the most famous. You can tell it's a sort of different artist from the other frescoes. This is probably the most famous of all episodes to do with Nicholas of Myra, or you can tell me at the end if this is the one that you know about or one of the ones that you know about. This is an impoverished father here, prostrated before the Saint Nicholas. And in the background are his daughters, whom he, because of his impoverishment, he's having to sell into prostitution in order for them all to survive, I assume. And Nicholas found out about this, and he threw 3 bags of gold on consecutive nights in through the window of the house and saved the girls, effectively providing them with a dowry. And he didn't ever want his identity to be revealed because he's a very humble saint. But on the 3rd night, the father lay awake, waiting to see who was throwing these bags of gold in, and chased him down the street and discovered who it was who had done this. And Nicholas beseeched him not to tell anybody about his identity, because he didn't want people to know the good works that he was doing. And so his holiness was revealed actually later through another miracle, but the father kept his promise and didn't tell anybody. And this is an episode called the Praxis de Tribus Filiabus, so the episode of the 3 daughters. So this is Nicholas's tomb, or what exists of his original tomb, or parts of his original tomb, in the top left there, in the church in Myra. And then there's a giant attractive yellow arrow pointing to Myra down on this Lycian kind of gulf of southwestern Turkey, and Istanbul up here. And I think we can think of all of this effectively providing witness or testimony, unequivocal proof, if you like, to the emergence of the cult of Nicholas, and also to the importance of Myra at this time as kind of the centre of an ecclesiastical organisation. But it was also a very important harbour for the transport of grain and other goods across the Mediterranean, particularly from Egypt into Turkey. So before the city was destroyed, I think in the 9th century, and subsequently rebuilt, but it was destroyed in the 9th century. It was a very important port. In the life of Nicholas of Sion, there is an episode just before Nicholas of Sion dies, actually, where we learn that, and I'm quoting from the text now, when the time of the Rosalia of our forefather Saint Nicholas came, the servant of God, Nicholas of Zion, went down to the metropolis of Myra to take part in a synod. So this is in the 6th century. So the synod indicates the status of Myra and the kind of metropolitan significance of the city. But the Rosalia, which is specifically mentioned in the text, is really interesting too. It's a festival from pre-Christian days and honouring the dead with roses or with flowers. And it seems to have been adapted by Christians from this kind of pre-Christian honouring with flowers to denoting the saint's feast day. So it's likely that this synod took place on the 6th of December. But also Rosalia was noted by Pope Gregory I as indicating the fragrance of saint's blood. And if any of you are familiar with Nicholas, you will be familiar with the idea of not just the sweetness of the smell that emanates from the saint's body, but the fact that his body to this day gives off what's called manna. It gives off a watery oil that can be captured into phials and is taken by or bought by pilgrims to Bari, where Nicholas's bones currently are. So it may be that in this 6th century life of St. Nicholas of Zion, when he talks about going to Myra at the Rosalia of St. Nicholas, he is talking about the feast day upon which they collected the manna, the oil that emerged from the bones of Nicholas of Myra himself. And as I say, this is something that still happens to this very day. So St. Nicholas is of is a myrrhablytic saint. He gives off myrrh. He gives off this oil, this watery oil. These are the core elements of his vita in Latin, the praxis de stratillatis, so the saving of the commanders, the saving of the three daughters, the episode of the saving of the sailors, the episode where there's a grain ship comes into port, and it's a bit like the loaves and fishes. Nicholas takes a small bit of grain. His people are dying in a famine, and so Nicholas takes a small portion of the grain on the ship, and it feeds the entire region. But also when the ship returns to Alexandria from whence it came, none of the grain is missing. So there's that miracle of the feeding. And then there's the episode of Artemide. It's an episode where St. Nicholas saves a shipload of sailors from their encounter with the goddess Diana. Nicholas of Myra was known for smashing up pagan sanctuaries in Lycia during his episcopacy. So these are the core elements of Nicholas's vita. But any of you who've read A Life of St. Nicholas will have read many more miracles than this, many more, what do you call them, sensational miracles than this. And Nicholas is, I read a lot of saints' lives, I've done a lot of work on saints' lives. St. Nicholas appears to be one of those saints to whom miracles stick. His life became, so this is the core of his life in the 9th century, as written by John the Deacon, and by the 10th century, other miracles, local miracles, but also miracles that writers just thought sounded like they could have been done by St. Nicholas, got appended to his life. So his life becomes longer and longer and more extraordinary as the centuries go by, until, I suppose, really the 13th century, when it was more or less, it became sort of fixed. And Nicholas, as some of you might also know, was demoted from a kind of mandatory saint in 1969 to a sort of optional saint. I think partly because of the accrual of all of these miracles, not these miracles, but all of these additional miracles. So Nicholas is a myrrhablytic saint, but he is also, and this is what makes him virtual, I think, and perfect for our days, very good at fighting kind of plague and pestilence. So we could definitely do with some of that. But he's also a thaumaturgic saint. So he has magical powers, specific magical powers, to appear virtually in more than one place simultaneously. And so therefore he is, to my mind, a virtual saint. And in one episode, this is from the Old English Life, this kind of combines all of the best bits of Nicholas, really, in a sense. He's quite stern, and we're going to look at some depictions of him in just a minute. But he's also patron saint of sailors for a reason, because he keeps saving them. And he's also very good at bashing heretics or pagan gods or goddesses like Diana. Because there's a bunch of sailors who are going to see Nicholas, and all of a sudden the sailors see an old woman rowing a boat, and they ask her if she needs any help. And she says, "Dear brothers, I see that you hurry towards the Lord Nicholas, and I, a poor wretch, want to journey there with you and receive his blessing if I might. But I've got another necessity." This is in the middle of the sea, right? "I have another necessity to attend to, and because of this anxiety, I can't travel there. I've got a little bit of oil that I would like you to present to God's friend, because my gratitude is very much directed towards him. And I pray you, dear friend," she says to the sailors, "bring this little offering to his minster and smear the walls all around with this in remembrance of me." And the sailors answered and said they'd gladly do that. So the demon, disguised as an old woman, delivered that evil oil and rode from them and quickly vanished from their sight. In truth, the sailors didn't know anything of the deceit, but rowed forward with great innocence, just as they'd done before. And when they'd rowed for a little while, they unexpectedly saw a ship full of men who were very fair in appearance. And in the middle of them all sat a man very like Nicholas, who immediately began to ask questions of them, and then said, "Listen, you good men, who was that woman who spoke with you a little while ago?" Thereupon the men told him what she'd said to them and what she'd given them, and showed him the oil. And he said again to them, "Truly, that woman who spoke thus to you is the shameful goddess Diana. If you want to know what that oil is, which she placed in your hands, throw it quickly away from you and out into the sea now." And they immediately did as they were instructed. And as soon as the oil touched the water, a great fire arose and the sea burned for a very long time, because this oil is Greek fire. It's called mediakon, so it's an explosive. And the sailors then landed on the coast of Lycia, and they saw Nicholas and recognized him straight away as the fair man who had been in the boat and saved their lives. So he has this thaumaturgic skill of appearing in places where he couldn't possibly be. And that, I think, kind of is at the heart of what makes Nicholas so very special. He appears both in visions, but he actually appears as himself physically at moments of great crisis and great need. So what's really interesting about Nicholas, and just saints in general, isn't it? But Nicholas in particular, is his appeal to a whole host of people, a whole host of different kinds of people, and for his ability to solve major, kind of huge regional problems through his intervention, even when he's not specifically asked for. So he's an incredibly powerful saint, and that he is known as Nicholas the Wonder Worker. So this thaumaturgic component of his life features in a lot of the kind of depictions of Nicholas, but the ones where you're most likely to see him depicted, apart from just as himself, include in particular and the 3 bags of gold. And this is much later. This is a 14th century capital initial M that is historiated, with Nicholas on the right hand side there, again with his book in his left hand, but not such a magnificent book, and the old father on the left hand side there with the 3 anxious looking daughters, and 1 bag of gold in Nicholas's right hand as he throws it through the window. Nicholas here is depicted, this is a French manuscript from the 14th century. It's currently in the British Library, but you know, Nicholas here is depicted unbearded, so he's still a very youthful Nicholas. This is Nicholas before he was made bishop. This is Nicholas using up the money that his rich noble parents left him when they died. They themselves, with the exception of conceiving Nicholas, they led chaste lives. They were very wealthy. And Nicholas was immediately recognized as holy as a baby, because he wouldn't, he fasted on, even as from the minute he was born, he fasted on Wednesdays and Fridays. So he was immediately kind of marked out as holy. And this is, as I say, this is one of the most kind of familiar episodes that you're likely to see portrayed. And here's another portrayal of it. This is in the Met. This is Bici di Lorenzo, Florence. It was made for a monastery in Florence. And again, here you see Nicholas clambering up the door to reach the window to throw his 3rd bag of gold in, right on top of the daughter's head by the look of her posture there. And so he's a young, energetic and vibrant saint in this particular episode, unlike the saint as we're used to seeing him, bearded and kind of quite stern and often quite sort of static looking. So this story then is one of the ones that you're likely to see. And then in other kind of illustrations, again, the episode of the 3 generals who Nicholas rescues from imprisonment, the Stratilates story, the 3 Egyptian generals who are wrongly imprisoned by Constantine. Nicholas appears in a fury. He's in Myra in Turkey, right? But he appears in Alexandria to Constantine in a fury, because Constantine has Constantinople, not Alexandria. What am I talking about? He appears to Constantine in Constantinople in a fury because these 3 guys have been wrongly imprisoned. So what's also interesting about Nicholas is the number 3, which appears a number of. It's interesting. It's obviously such a kind of biblical number, but it is particularly interesting. And this month I'm tweeting an advent calendar of Nicholas, actually. So obviously I'm on window number 7 today. Partly because I was doing this, I've been gathering images, so I thought I would just tweet them. And it just is striking when you force yourself to do something as silly as that, what kinds of things actually jump out at you. So again, you know, the number 3 does seem very significant. And then we also see the image of Nicholas with sailors an awful lot, as we've already seen a couple of examples of. And this is the St. Mary's Psalter, which was made in London in about 1315 and was saved from being illegally exported out of England in 1553 and given to Queen Mary Tudor. And she used it as her own Psalter. And the book finishes a very thick, it's like 300 folios. So it's a very thick, small manuscript. And the last set of folios has episodes from the life of St. Nicholas. This is, I think, the third of those kind of cartoon-like foot of the page illustrations. And Nicholas is interesting, isn't it? He's the Nicholas as we expect to see him here. He doesn't have his book. He has his crozier in his left hand, but he is certainly walking on water in order to save these saints. So that kind of that obvious kind of affiliation with Christ's miraculous powers is made manifest in this particular image, with the sailors reaching up and beseeching him to save them from the stormy seas. So the praxis de nautis of the tribus filiabus and of the stratilates, these are images that you're very likely to see. And Nicholas here is reminiscent of the Nicholas as we know him and think of him in the pre-modern period. And again, this, I think it's quite easy to spot Nicholas because he tends to be fairly static, often depicted face on. Obviously it helps like this if his name is there, but he's often got his book in his left hand, in the same way that the sword is Paul's symbol and the keys are Peter's. Lots of saints carry books, but Nicholas, it's a particular attribute, partly because he was regarded as learned, and I think that's because of his supposed fight with Arius at the Council of Nicaea. So this is the Melisande Psalter, made in Jerusalem, actually, just after the Crusades started, so in 1139, and that makes it quite interesting, doesn't it? Because it's a kind of combination of East and West. He's made to look, I suppose, considerably more Western than Eastern, but nevertheless, as I say, this was a manuscript that was made in Jerusalem, and his attributes are very clear there. But even with all this information I can give you, he is a sort of shadowy figure, because we're looking at the sort of 9th and 10th centuries for the full compilation of his life. And this has got to be one of my favourite things just in the world, I think. This is St. Nicholas. I'm sure many of you have seen this wooden, hollowed out statue, 6 foot tall, of St. Nicholas on display in the cloisters in New York. It was made in Umbria for the Church of San Nicola in Monticchio in Abruzzo in around 1350. And obviously it's severely damaged, so the right-hand side of it has gone, but that just makes it look incredible. Don't you think? Like, just incredible. I don't know if you've seen that statue of Arthur that they've just put in place at Tintagel in Cornwall, who is made to look hologramic, made to look hologramic. And this is what this Nicholas just makes me think of. It's just an extraordinary, the way it's been damaged is just extraordinary. It's made of poplar wood, paint and gilt. And in his left arm, which is obviously gone, I'm pretty sure he would be holding a book. And I think the drapery of the fold of his vestments does suggest that it was raised up. Just to get my cursor, I'll just wave it around here. It looks like it's raised up as it would be if he was holding with a veiled hand, his normal attribute of the gospel book. And here's a close-up of this photograph, which is just stunning, absolutely stunning. If you look at the work of the gilding and the polychrome paint work, his vestment here is actually linen. This is linen that's just been painted over around the neckline here. So it's a sort of multimedia sculpture of the saint. Really, really stunning, presumably in situ as much as it is in its current position. And so this highly venerated saint, he ends up in New York, of course, and the kind of, he becomes as popular as he does partly because of the artistic depictions of him that are really very prolific indeed, but also his relics, which were dispersed throughout the world, as we'll see sort of momentarily. So this is another Italian he doesn't look quite as charming in this one. There's an Italian depiction of him in the 15th century British Library manuscript Harley 3547. You can tell it's Italian straight away, of course, by the colours, can't you? The palette is clearly Italian. What's interesting here is he's got his other symbol. He's got his symbol of the Gospel book, and on top of it are 3 golden balls, which are the 3 gold bags that he threw in through the windows of the daughter's house. The 3 gold balls representing the 3 bags of gold are why he is the patron saint of pawn. Why the symbol of the pawnbroker? It is 3 golden balls. So I'm sure many of you knew that. Very familiar indeed. So by the time we get to the 9th and the 10th century, his life is fully formed and it's moved from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Western Mediterranean. But there were 2 things that really made the cult become just the exceptional and extraordinary and powerful story of the saint that it has. And that is, as I'm sure many of you know, the theft of his relics in 1087. So by the time we get to the 11th century, saints cults are big business. I mean, really big business. So pilgrimage gets underway very seriously in sort of the 10th century. Think of Santiago de Compostela and all of the routes that lead that way. The Life of St. Giles was written. Giles lived just north of Marseille, sort of here where my cursor is, in France. And you could visit the shrine of St. Giles and then walk across France and meet up with the Via Tolosana to take you over the Pyrenees and onto the way to St. James, the route to Compostela. And at the same time as pilgrimage was really taking off, relics became big business, exchanged between kings and queens and really high-ranking prelates, bits of bones and bits of teeth and phials of myrrh in the case of St. Nicholas. And I think the sailors in Italy decided he was the patron saint of sailors, so they decided they were going to go and get him. They were going to go from Bari in the heel of Italy in Apulia, sail across the Mediterranean, land at Myra, and basically steal the body of St. Nicholas for Bari. Of course, it's very handy to know that the saint is on your side when you're attempting to steal him. And in fact, they heard the voice of St. Nicholas giving his approval. He said, "Here is the tomb in which I lie," he said to the sailors. "Take me then and depart, for the people of Bari are to be forever protected by my intercession." So the monks in Myra, they claimed, the sailors of Bari, who also had a couple of priests with them in this raid on the tomb of St. Nicholas, they decided the monks of Myra weren't doing a good enough job looking after St. Nicholas, so they would go and make a better job of it by stealing him and bringing him back, which they did in 1087. And a new church, which is still the church in Bari, was built over the shrine of Nicholas, and there was huge celebrations in Bari. So he's also known as St. Nicholas of Bari. The sailors of Venice, on the other hand, were really annoyed that the sailors of Bari had pipped them to the St. Nicholas post, and they, some 10 years later, sailed from Venice to Myra and scavenged around in the area of the shrine of St. Nicholas and found some remaining bones. So they got those and they took those back to Venice. So both Venice and Bari in Italy claim to have the most bones of the body of St. Nicholas. I'm actually going to go to Bari. God, if we ever can get on a plane again, Bari is going to be one of my first stops because I still haven't been there. And so that's kind of number 1 on my list of places to visit. So it was this removal of the bones from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Central Mediterranean in 1087 that really kind of, if you read any of the history books on St. Nicholas, it's this event that they will tell you propelled this cult in the way that it did to create of this saint the kind of global phenomenon that he is. And in fact, in 1098, there was a council of Bari, so 185 kind of the most senior prelates in the Western Church went to this council in Bari, and among them was Anselm, who was Archbishop of Canterbury, and he had a particular devotion to Nicholas, as did all of the monks of Bec in Normandy, many of whom, of course, became senior bishops and archbishops in England in the period after the Norman conquest. So Anselm had a particular devotion to Nicholas. So this is the new shrine in Bari of St. Nicholas at the top there. And that organisation, the stnicholascentre.org, who are, they're a Christian centre and they're very keen to promote Christianity through the work that they're doing, but they have the most incredible amount of information on St. Nicholas. So if you're really interested in him, that's where, after this, that's where I would start. It is a bit of a maze of information. So the bones of St. Nicholas that were taken from Myra and brought to Bari were buried in great ceremony in a newly built basilica in Bari, in this shrine, underneath that gold kind of opening here. And every year they recover from his bones more of this manna, this watery oil substance, put it into small bottles, and you can, as a pilgrim, you can buy it. Or if you're an important visitor, presumably they'll give you some of it. And here, bottom left, are the bones in Venice at the Lido, the bones that they found remaining in the original tomb of St. Nicholas in Myra and brought back to Venice in the 1090s. And this is an ancient notice that the bones of St. Nicholas were buried, which they also brought back with them from Myra as proof that they had got hold of these bones. Now, these bones, both of them, both the bones in Bari and the bones in Venice, were examined between 1953 and 1957 by a forensic pathologist, Luigi Martino, who said that he is certain, he said at the time that he is certain that the bones in Venice are from the same body as the bones in Bari, from the same body. So these are all St. Nicholas's bones, but smashed up in the case of the Venice bones. But both sets of bones were invested again by Francesco Introna, another forensic pathologist, in the 2000s, so in around 2004. And he also agrees that they are from the same body, and did a whole new tranche of investigatory work on these bones, including facial reconstruction, which I'll show you at the very end. And there is a 4-part, I assume it was 1 or 2 parts on the television, but there's a 4-part YouTube sequence called Secret Face of Santa, which is really good. So if you, and it's about an hour or so long. So if you're interested in this particular part of the story about the historical, the potential for these bones to be historical truth, then look at that thing on that television program on YouTube. Now, all of the historians then attribute the explosion of the cult of Nicholas to this event of the translation. However, in my own research, and also in C.W. Jones's book on St. Nicholas of Bari, in the 10th century, there was an empress called Theophanu. She was a niece of the Byzantine emperor John Tzimiskes, and she married Otto II, who became Holy Roman Emperor in sort of modern day sort of Germany, Low Countries. And she married Otto II, and she brought with her all of the richness of the Byzantine court, including silks and various other textiles. She also brought with her dedication to cults of saints from the Eastern Mediterranean, including principally, of course, Nicholas, but also Pantaleon, St. Chrysostom, and various other saints, but Nicholas and Pantaleon in particular. And this here is the Valkhof at Nijmegen in the Netherlands. This is a chapel that was built, dedicated to St. Nicholas after the death of Theophanu, but by her niece, I think it was, or her daughter. Her daughter built this chapel to make that connection between her mother and the Eastern St. Nicholas. And so the Low Countries, from this point onwards, the Holy Roman Emperor, but especially the Low Countries, Lotharingia in particular, had a cult of St. Nicholas. And in the 11th century, that cult was introduced into Northern Europe more broadly, and especially into Normandy, because contiguous with the Low Countries, and then before the Norman conquest into Britain through the Lotharingian bishops who accompanied Edward the Confessor when he took up his throne in 1042. In other words, there was already a cult of St. Nicholas established in Northern Europe before the translation of his relics in 1087, I would contend. And I think that there's lots of proof for that. This is a bad image of the ivory, of an ivory of the Empress Theophanu on the right-hand side there, and Otto II being blessed by Christ. And you can tell how Byzantine that is in its iconography. And in fact, this profoundly influenced the reign of Canute and the iconography that he chose to have depicted of himself and his wife Emma. So they were very influenced by the imperial regalia and the imperial stature, status and self-declaration of Otto and Theophanu. It's really, really interesting. Also, Theophanu introduced the fork into Europe. So not just St. Nicholas, but the fork with which you eat your dinner. So it's thanks to her that we use those implements. So culminated in the Low Countries, and that's sort of, you can testify to this by, I should give a prize now, I should have a bag of chocolates and I should be able to virtually throw the chocolates through the screen at whoever can name this font. Where is this font? This is one of the most famous fonts in, I don't know if I could say in the world, but certainly in Europe. It was made in Tournai in the Low Countries, which, as I say, is where the cult of St. Nicholas had been established prior to the Norman conquest. And it's made from Carboniferous limestone, quarried in Tournai in modern Belgium and brought across in pieces to Winchester Cathedral in around 1150, possibly a gift of Henry of Blois, who was Bishop of Winchester, to the diocese. And it is incredibly beautiful, as you can see, but contains scenes from the life of St. Nicholas. So the sailors here that you can see, and him rescuing the imprisoned generals on this panel made out of this single block of stone. And then obviously the Nicholas here and his cathedral, his basilica behind him, the beseeching father and the three daughters, and then some random guy with a hawk, but the three daughters, the father and Nicholas. So this is still the font as it's used in Winchester today, weighing at about 1.5 tons, which is kind of incredible, isn't it? And on those beautiful sort of Norman style candy rock kind of pillars. Not very far from, I think behind it, and sort of down to the right is the thingy, epitaph, gravestone slab thingy of Jane Austen. So I think it's certainly true that pictures and sculptures became something about Nicholas and these three girls and the three boys in a tub that we'll talk about in just a second. But something about this saint's life really lent itself to these dramatic, vibrant, dynamic kinds of renditions in art and in texts and in sculpture, and as we shall see, in music and so on. It's really very interesting. What was it about these stories, these little episodes? You know, they form vignettes that are really caught the public imagination, partly because they're to do with ordinary people, these poor impoverished daughters, these poor sailors. They're ordinary people who are beneficiaries of Nicholas's generosity of spirit and his sort of general beneficence. And so the cult really took off. And we're going to just look briefly at the Old English life of St. Nicholas, which is the earliest vernacular life in any language to have survived. So this is the one that I did my PhD on, around 1150, the same time as the font in Winchester. And it tells the single most contained version of the life of St. Nicholas, the one that we saw on the slide earlier, with no additional miracles, just that sequence that I talked about. It's copied in Rochester, this manuscript by three scribes, really very beautiful. And in this text, Nicholas, who can be quite sort of, although he's kind and compassionate and saves all kinds of people, he can be quite sort of ferocious, quite stern in the text. He gets very shouty at people of authority who are abusing their positions of authority. And he's quite shouty in this text too, in this Old English text, but in this text, the author keeps calling him God's darling, God's darling, Goddess darling, and really humanizes the saint, makes him very humble, just very sort of kind, And also in this particular life, unlike many others, talks about Nicholas's gift as always being thur God's giver, through God's gift. So it's never Nicholas's power that creates the miracle. It's always Nicholas as a conduit of God's power. And that's really important in the light of the writings of people like Anselm or Honorius Augustodunensis in the 12th century, who were really concerned to humanize the saints, but also to create this intimate relationship between people on earth and God, to kind of create this connection of love and mercy. And so from that point of view, this life is very important. Then there is also a contemporary life. This is not a contemporary manuscript, but it is a contemporary life written in around 1150 by this guy from Jersey. So he spoke Anglo-Norman or French of England. His name was Robert Wass. And you might have heard of him because he wrote a Roman de Bru and a Roman de Rue, and also the life of St. Margaret and a text on the Virgin Mary. But he wrote this poem about St. Nicholas again around 1150. Just a little bit later than the English life, because the English life had existed in a preceding copy that we've now lost. So this life of Wace survives, or Wass survives, in 5 different copies. And he added just a ton of episodes about bringing a boiled baby back to life, resurrecting 3 murdered clerics who had been killed by a butcher and pickled in brine and then served in meat pies, resurrecting a murdered merchant. So just adding various miracles to expand the life of St. Nicholas and creating this much more sort of sensational sequence of events, which do lend themselves certainly to drama. And here's another version of that from very famous late 13th century trilingual manuscript written by a professional guy in the West Midlands, this is the Miracles of St. Nicholas, 13th century, but he conveniently gives us a picture of Nicholas at the bottom, just in case we don't know what a bishop looks like. So this really was a miracle collection, and miracle collections were particularly popular among lay people because they could see the potential ways in which saints could intercede for them. And they also could really sympathize with the characters in the text, because these characters in the text were normal people who were helped by the saint. So whereas the life in Corpus 303 is definitely a biography, what we see here in these other texts are much more like miracle collections, as I say. So through texts, then you could learn about the ways that Nicholas could intercede for you, and you could develop your love of the saint and appreciation of the cult, but also through relics. I'm sure a lot of you have gone around kind of looking at relics and reliquaries. It's through relics, through the tangible and material remnants of bits of the body of the saint, that you can get the closest proximity to, I suppose, to God and Christ and Mary, the saints acting as mediators of God's grace. So in Lille, so there are hundreds of relics of Nicholas around the world. And these are just a couple of examples. So there's his finger on the right in Saint Nicolas de Port in Lorraine, put into this, it's called a somebody might remind me, but it's a brachiate, something like that. So it's an arm reliquary. And the left-hand side is a reliquary for a tooth of St. Nicholas. And then these are the bottles of manna that you can get in Bari, these phials that contain this oil that emanates from the saint. And of course, his bones, which exist not just in the Lido in Venice or in Bari, but in places around the world. And this bone is a pelvic bone, which has been investigated by researchers at the Relics Cluster at Keble College, Oxford, and they've dated it to the 4th century, so it fits with the story. It was acquired from a collection in Lyon, and it now resides in Morton Grove, Illinois, where there is a collection of 1,500 relics of saints. Don't know why, but anyway, American veneration of St. Nicholas is a real thing. I don't know if any of you have been to Tarpon Springs in Florida, where my daughter was doing a soccer tournament in Sarasota, and I dragged her and my husband to see St. Nicholas in Tarpon Springs, which is a community of sponge fisher people from Greece, set up in the 19th century, and they built this Basilica of St. Nicholas. And they have this icon of St. Nicholas here, which is very famous because it is, in 1970, a cleaning woman noticed that it cried, that the icon itself cried. And sporadically, subsequently, tears have fallen from the eyes of this St. Nicholas. So here's a close-up, and you can see the sort of tracks of the tears just here. And they had the case tested, and it's airtight and so on. And it's been testified to by dignitaries of the Greek Orthodox Church, who have actually seen this happening. And indeed, I have a tiny icon of St. Nicholas. I don't know, where's my camera? I don't know how well you can see this. Can you see that? It's got like a track coming down from his eye. It must be something to do with the metal, just the metal, but just what an odd thing. So other kinds of both relics, but also apotropaic remnants of Nicholas survive. This ring was found really recently, look, near Galilee, and it contains an image of a smiling St. Nicholas. And these testify to the pilgrims who go and today go and see Nicholas, and also who went in previous years. And partly they went to see Nicholas because of his ability to rescue, but also to resuscitate. And it's this story that is the story of these three clergy that is very, very popular in the public imagination, of these three clerics who were pickled by this butcher. And Nicholas hears, or he just knows that the meat that's been served at a feast belongs to the flesh of these boys, and he's able to resurrect all three of them to tell their story. So you see this everywhere in art, in this Liverpool University book manuscript, in this French manuscript, in Notre Dame, in this sculpture of St. Nicholas, and in wall paintings and other architecture in churches that were dedicated to St. Nicholas, which exploded in the 12th century. There are 660 churches dedicated to St. Nicholas in England, a very significant proportion of them from the 12th and 13th centuries. And so this wall painting, it's very difficult to see, but these are the clothes of the boys hanging over a pole. There is Nicholas with his mitre and his crozier. And there are three little lads in a tub here with the butcher who had tried to pickle them. So these wall paintings and frescoes and sculptures and so on testify to this apocryphal life. And at Bishopsbourne in England, there is this very famous wall painting which has been touched up, but of these three boys praying to be released from the situation in which they find themselves. And they're just there. I'm just going to do another couple of minutes, I'll stop. But they lend themselves to drama, as do other episodes from the life of St. Nicholas that were apocryphal and added in the sort of 11th and 12th centuries, including the Filius Gitronus, the story of a stolen little boy, stolen by a pagan king, who Nicholas is able, can you see him flying down? He's flying down and he physically removes the boy from his capture and returns him to his parents. So Nicholas is really involved in saving children throughout. Every episode is that involves sort of salvation, is salvation of the wrongly imprisoned, of children or of women. So you can see kind of how that lends itself to the popular imagination, but also to dramatic reconstruction. This is a 12th century play, so very early play. And music, you know, the earliest song in English is this one, around 1180, 1190. This is Godrich of Finchall's Cantus Eustim de Sancto Nicolao. So in English, St. Nicholas, God's darling, build for us a fair house, both at birth and at our burial, and help bring us to where we'll fare well. So set to music, one of the earliest songs. So there's something about Nicholas that kind of makes him come alive in the popular imagination. And some of you may know, I was listening to this today, Benjamin Britten's cantata of St. Nicholas, written in 1948, which details the rescuing of the 3 boys in the tub, the 3 pickle boys. So finally, we're used to seeing Nicholas look like this then. Very early Byzantine plaque, straightforward looking, bearded, older, balding St. Nicholas, also bearded in this stained glass from the 12th century that's at the Met. And here in the Walters Art Gallery, W163, which I think is 14th century, bearded, blessing, so St. Nicholas doing his blessing. Breadth of appeal for everybody, for the laity, rich men, poor men. In a diptych like this, here is Nicholas next to the Virgin Mary, so really proximate to her. And from that, in the High Middle Ages, to this, through the power of American immigration, the founding of New Amsterdam and the bringing across of European traditions, capturing the imagination of Americans in the 19th century, and in this case, The Night Before Christmas, or A Visit of St. Nicholas, published in 1823. This poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," went all through the house. I don't know how many of you, I assume, I'm guessing, but most of you know this. This poem was based by Clement Clarke Moore, the author, the poet, on his Dutch acquaintance. So those, the Dutch traditions of Sant Nicolaas kind of came across and influenced Thomas Nast. Again, I'm sure many of you know this story, who during the American Civil War introduced this elf-like figure of Santa Claus, right? Here, actually, I don't know very much about these images, so I'm not going to say too much about them, but I'm more interested in the transformation of the bearded St. Nicholas. And here again, this is Thomas Nast with his impish looking St. Nicholas. And then, of course, that influenced the Coca-Cola Man and Norman Rockwell's depiction of a very beneficent, benevolent, laughing, jolly St. Nicholas in the middle of the 20th century. But what he really looked like, so they took the skull of St. Nicholas from Bari and they did this digital reconstruction. Caroline Wilkerson, who you may have seen her work on in various sort of documentaries. In 2004, they're using the skull in the shrine at Bari. They were able to reconstruct this face, who they believe is the real St. Nicholas. And he has a very severely broken nose, so he got punched from the left, so that his nose kind of ended up more on the right of his face. And he has that proper kind of, well, I say proper, because it could vary so dramatically, but the complexion that one expects to see, I suppose one could say, from the Eastern Mediterranean. And they redid it with some finer equipment in 2014 and came up with this, which they believe to be an even more proximate likeness of the saint. So we've gone over the course of 1700 years from this shadowy figure, so revered through the Middle Ages, this extraordinary kind of accumulation of miracles, to this careful and close work that provides us with the real face of Father Christmas, whose jolly season it is, the end. Thank you for your patience. That's 58 slides you just sat through. Well done. I'll unshare. But we can go back to any pictures that you want to say, have a look at.
We have a hand up from Bob Nyden.
Well, hello, and thank you very much, Elaine. That was wonderful. My wife Cindy and I went to Bari for San Nicola's, as I say, San Nicola's Festival of the Translation, which is on the 9th of May. And it's a very big deal. And so, in fact, behind me, you see one of the constructions that they do specifically for this. It's about 5 stories high. There's 1,000 people at least in there milling around. They have food trucks, they have fireworks, they have all kinds of things, but they translate the statue of the saint from his basilica into this spot here for a few days. And if you look behind my wife, Cindy, there is the statue of the saint being moved along. And So I highly recommend that if we ever get to travel again, everybody go to Bari on the 9th of May and have a celebration there. It's great fun. And I also wanted to note that although the 6th of December is the Saint's Day, the 19th of December is also the Saint's Day because they celebrate, for the Orthodox people, the Julian calendar. So they do the same saint twice, in case you missed the first time around. So thank you again very much.
Thanks, that's wonderful. Great, beautiful background. Both of you, actually, really lovely. Thanks.
Dick Jones? Unmute yourself.
It sounded to me like Superman was modeled on St. Nicholas.
I don't know anything. Well, yes, I suppose so. Like I'm just dredging my brain for anything I know about Superman. Yes, he's very useful. Rather more fictional, don't you think, than lovely St. Nicholas. I really have such a fondness for St. Nicholas. It's partly because of my PhD, but also my son, when he was very tiny, so probably developed about 3 months old, he developed a blocked tear duct. So, you know, his eyes would kind of be really sore and kind of gunked up. And they said that they wouldn't operate on him until he was at least sort of 18 months old. Anyway, I went on holiday with him and my mum to Blakeney in Norfolk. And of course, it being on the coast, there's an enormous, very sort of wealthy church that was built by sailors and tradespeople in it was the 14th century. And I go to any church, like many of you, I suppose, any church I go to, irrespective of to whom it's devoted. Anyway, and so I lit a candle, St. Nicholas, and I said a little prayer. And I kid you not, this is absolutely true. The following day, my son's eye cleared up. So I already had a terrific fondness for St. Nicholas, but that does make me wonder. That really does make me wonder. But yeah, so he is a Superman. He's a Superman. And in that illustration that we saw, he can clearly fly as well. Even more impressive. And walk on water.
Questions or comments?
I have a question.
Go, Bob.
Yeah. Elaine, can you say some more about the origins of this whole repertoire of miracles? Who's reporting them? And are they being, simply by recording them, are they being accepted, or are they independently documented, or how does that happen?
Yeah, that's a key question, really. And I think until the sort of high Middle Ages, so certainly post 1215 Fourth Lateran Council, there was no formulary for canonization. You could get notes of sort of authenticity or assurance from Rome. So, for example, Thomas Becket, was canonized just almost immediately. But for more local saints, it just was, so one thinks of Edmund of East Anglia, or even Cuthbert. It was the kind of organic, ground up, a sort of popular swell of love for the saint that in the end kind of created more than just a local veneration. And in the case of, in the sort of 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th centuries, when this was really kind of, saints' lives were really kind of getting written down, there was quite a lot of shenanigans as much as genuine kind of belief. Lots of posthumous miracles are attested in the case of Nicholas, lots of them local. So you've got your file of manna, as at Bec, for example, in Normandy, and somebody would come and they would venerate the relic and then they would be cured. And so you have enough of that kind of attestation or testimony of the saint's wonder working, or the same with Swithin at Winchester, for example. and that would gain traction, and then they would be canonized locally and their feast day would be celebrated. And then it would be brought to the attention of the kind of the local delegate from the pontiff, brought to the attention of the Pope, and then eventually, I think in the High Middle Ages, and maybe somebody knows this better than me because it gets a bit late for me after sort of 1250, but eventually a process emerged, right? I think so, even kind of in the very late Middle Ages, a kind of process emerged for the canonization of those who weren't automatic kind of contenders like Thomas Becket or Anne or whomever. And of course, the Reformation saw off a lot of this in the 16th century, and in a sense, it's why Nicholas. It's one of the reasons why Nicholas sort of disappears a little bit in the 16th and 17th centuries before European immigration to the States in large numbers, when obviously, as you saw, it sort of re-emerged. But so these local miracles would be one thing, but these other miracles that took on this air of authenticity and, I suppose, an air of originality to the saint's life itself, like the pickled boys. So somebody just kind of came up with that. I think it might be Otlo of Emiran. In the case of the pickled boys, Otlo of Emiran, who was one of Rabanus Maris's monastic students. Do you know, like he might have read it somewhere, or he might have just heard it, or there is this impression that with the three boys, it got confused with, there was some imagistic confusion.
Yeah.
And a picture of the three daughters got confused for a picture of three tonsured boys. Certainly in the terms of the iconography in the later medieval period, there's an intimation that the three balls, the bags of gold, the three women's heads and the three pickled boys' heads all became kind of conflated.
Yeah.
So there is some, the shenanigans I'm talking about. What one can look at the life of St. Giles, who is also a darling saint. I mean, he's such a gentle, lovely hermit. He's a hermit, and he is fed by a hind who comes to see him every day, and then the hind is being chased by King Flavius and his horses and hounds, and she flees to St. Giles for protection, and St. Giles protects her, and in so doing himself gets shot by arrows, and the king sees what he's done and he's really sorry, and he recognizes how holy Giles is, and so founds a monastery for him, apparently in the sort of 8th or 9th century. But the life wasn't written down till the 10th century, and the life is made up of episodes from other saints' lives. So Saint Eloi, Eligius, Saint Eloi and Saint Martin of Tours are the providers of episodes for this life of Saint Egidius or Saint Giles. But it really took off. The monks at Saint Gilles really promoted it, and it took off. So there were some quite cynical exploiters of the potential for acquiring vast amounts of money from visiting pilgrims to tombs. Well, okay, to top it all, Glastonbury, discovering Arthur and Guinevere,
right,
just after Thomas Becket, right? Just after Thomas Becket was sainted, and everyone piled to Canterbury to get some merits. Just after that, they find amazing Arthur and Guinevere. And of course, the saint, like Nicholas, when he says, "Oh, you saved us from Bari, I'm not being looked after properly. Take me in your ship back to Bari and, revere me well." It's the same as St. Edmund of East Anglia, whose head was killed by Vikings in the late 9th century, late 7th, late 8th, late 9th century. And he was decapitated, as so many saints, martyr saints are, and they threw his head into brambles. And the villagers were looking for him. They loved him, and they knew he'd been killed by the Vikings. So they went to find his body and bury it properly. And they found his body. They couldn't find his head. So they did a big search of the countryside, and they were all shouting to each other to make sure they knew where each other was in the forest. And they heard this voice shouting, "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here." So they went towards the here, here, here. And it was the head of St. Edmund calling to them, so they could find his head and reattach it to the body. And then they buried it. And when they translated it into a much grander shrine, some decades later, the head had been miraculously reattached to the body, and there was just a thin scar to show where it was chopped off. Probably not, but you know, so I think it's calling on believers, right? And I
Yes,
think,
it
like,
is. Yeah.
yeah, and I think like with Saint Nicholas, I think there is an absolute kind of core of historicity to the man's life because of the solidity of cult that was founded
Yeah.
really in a relatively short period of time,
Yeah.
like some
Yeah.
decades.
Makes for a good miracle.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when I think about belief, I think about the Scala Sanctorum in Rome, opposite St. John Lateran, where those steps that St. Helena brought back from Jerusalem are sort of in situ, and they take you up to an icon, right? And those are the steps upon which Christ was presented to Pontius Pilate, and of course his blood is on the steps, and people go up the steps on their knees. And there's actually, and it's just, you know, kind of remarkable sort of honesty, really. I like this sign that is in the sanctuary that says, we don't know. The Catholic Church doesn't know if these are the steps upon which Christ ascended to Pontius Pilate. But we do know that since at least the early 4th century, people have truly believed this to be the case.
Yeah.
And at what point does the spirit of veneration actually kind of, in a sense, become ingested by the object or the icon or whatever it is? At what point? Because, you know, when you think about I just taught this class on pilgrimage and to the MLA, wonderful students, and a lot of them were saying that what made the pilgrimage, that whatever they did, the Shikoku pilgrimage in Japan or Compostela or the Via Francigena through Italy, it was the thought, you knew that you were treading in the footsteps of hundreds of thousands of pilgrims who had gone before you. And so it's something about the kind of accrual, if you like, of humans' desire to believe, to have faith.
Yep.
So I think, you know, with Nicholas, that's a lot of what that is.
Yep.
But some of those miracles, yes, they were definitely fabricated to expand his life. And I think because he's already so dramatic, the things he does are already so dramatic. It makes it easier to create something new for him. But they're always in that mold of helping, really, you know, people in a lot of trouble who need either resurrecting or some form of intervention by him that's a physical intervention.
Good. Thank you.
Great question. Sorry, I talked chat, but thank you, Bob. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Hello?
Any other hands? Oh, Bob, Dick Jones again.
Yes, in the Netherlands, their presents are brought by Black Peter. And I wonder if there's any relation at all between Black Peter and St. Nicholas.
So, Dick, that's that question raises all kinds of problematic issues, doesn't it? Because
yes.
Now the recognition of the how terrible and racist that social and cultural custom is, I think, has really been brought to the fore in the last few years. I think it's entirely fabricated, a little bit like the and I think it's fabricated in sort of in a documented way from, am I right, something like the 17th or 18th century? Is that right? Sort of post.
I don't know when that originated, but it's, you know, they've got costumes and museums.
Yeah, I think it's post-Reformation and probably to do with the expansion of, sort of Dutch colonialism, really. And I think it's a little bit, so there's also the conflation. This I really don't understand. So something to do with Nicholas and Krampus. Have you seen that Krampus thing? That pagan thing? This sort of ferocious thing with horns. There's some kind of conflation of Nicholas with Krampus. And again, I don't really understand that. I actually sort of, it's outside my realm of experience, but I do know that the Black Peter is very much criticised now for its overt colonialist and racist stereotypes. Yeah.
I have a question. you indicated that there are Turkish archaeologists who believe his body is still in Turkey. I wonder if you could comment on that.
So there are bones in, well, there's a number of things. Some Turkish archaeologists in oh my goodness, my mind's, okay, so the region where Myra is, or Demra, they have in recent decades suggested that the Bari sailors got the wrong tomb, and that in fact St. Nicholas's body is still in situ in Myra. So that's a kind of ongoing discussion that there hasn't been a lot of published archaeological work on that yet, but there's certainly mumblings about that. But the other thing is that there are bones in the Antalya Museum that date to the 4th century, but that do not belong to the same body as the body in Bari, because there was a thought, it's a jawbone. It's the right-hand side of the jaw. And so there was a thought, it's labeled as St. Nicholas's jawbone. But the forensic pathologist who worked on the bones in Bari, who is Italian, went to the museum with other forensic pathologists, including Turkish experts, and they did work on the jaw, and it's not the same body as in Bari. So I think it's definitely, it's a case of really watch this space, but there is no way that Bari's going to yield. There's no way that they're going to say, oh no, you're right, this is not the real saint. And I think because, so it's interesting, so Bob Nyden, you went to Bari and you went right up to the, as far as you're able to, the shrine of St. Nicholas. And of course his bones are underneath the shrine as we saw it there, underneath the ground and underneath sea level. I think this is right. And there is, I'm looking right at Bob Nyden, but you can't tell that, of course. I always forget this. You can't tell who I'm looking at. But anyway.
Yes, we did see that. Yes, we cannot see the bones.
No.
However, if you let me share my screen, I can show you the reconstruction that they use for the statue, which looks amazingly like the reconstruction that you showed earlier. So
Take it away, Bob.
let's see if we can, not sure how to do this. There.
Oh yeah.
So, when he walks down the street, as he's carried by all these men, the rhythm that they have makes it look like he's walking. He sort of shifts side to side, and he looks sort of startled also. But you see, he's got the crozier and the book and the 3 balls, and his complexion looks, I don't know, Turkish, I don't know.
Well, it definitely looks Mediterranean.
Yes.
Right. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, he should not be white. That's for sure. St. Nicholas should not be white. But he was 5'6". If the skeleton in Bari is the right one, they've measured it. He was 5'6". So that even in the 4th century or 3rd, 4th century, that's quite short for a man. And stocky. So the way that they depicted him with his broken nose and his just kind of, apparently he's got a very big skull. So he would have been this kind of stocky guy, and his life is kind of like that, you know, where he goes and he tackles people. There are three sailors, I think they're 3 sailors, who are about to be executed for something that they didn't do. These are not the same as the 3 generals. These are other much lower ranking people. And somebody says to Nicholas, oh, there's these 3 men, they're going to get executed and they haven't done anything. And so he runs really fast to where the execution is about to take place. And he lunges at the executioner and he wrestles the sword from his hand. So he says, right, you know, I'll give you back this sword, but you can't kill these 3 men. You have to kill me. Of course, they're not going to kill him. They know he's the bishop and a holy man and so on. But he's really pugnacious. And our guy here, he doesn't look quite so pugnacious, does he? He looks quite genteel actually, but he does in every other aspect. He does look Nicolaian,
Yeah.
or whatever the adjective would be. That's brilliant. Thank you. Wonderful. I've not seen that. That's great. That's somebody's alarm going off saying it's time for wine or sherry. 'Tis the season for sherry.
Jody, unmute, yeah.
Professor Treharne. Hi, Professor Traharne. Thank you so much for that lovely lecture. I enjoyed it so much. I'm going to have wonderful dreams and nightmares and confusion, and I learned so much. Could I ask you to go over again about St. Nicholas and the pestilence, the relationship on that again? I'd like to hear it, especially at this time.
Yes, I didn't actually say very much about that, apart from in the life of St. Nicholas of Myra, he is living at a time of tremendous famine. So the crops have failed, and a grain ship en route to Alexandria stops in at the port at Myra, and Nicholas manages to persuade the sailors to let him have some of the corn so he can feed his people. And of course, he takes some of the corn and it multiplies. So that's not plague, that's famine. But in the life of St. Nicholas of Zion, it's not an easy life to get hold of because it's only ever been edited once. And I managed to get a copy on Abe Books. So if anybody wants to borrow it, to read it, just let me know. But in the life of St. Nicholas of Zion, who either is the saint whose some episodes influence the life of St. Nicholas of Myra, or St. Nicholas of Zion actually manifests some episodes that properly belong to St. Nicholas of Myra anyway. We do know that in the 6th century, in St. Nicholas of Zion's case, we know that there was tremendous plague, and he was able to go around bizarrely sacrificing oxen and making merry. That's what the text says many times. So St. Nicholas of Zion, in order to counter the plague, slaughtered oxen and made merry with people. And his is the life that gets conflated with the life of St. Nicholas of Myra. So the 6th century, do you remember that medieval matters we had with that man from Harvard, Michael Muck, somebody, who talked about the 6th century as a period of climate change and of the spread of multiple, is it the Justinian plague? No, that's the 3rd century, isn't it? So no, it's the Justinian plague in the 6th century. So St. Nicholas of Myra himself, it was not a period of plague, but his life got conflated with some of the episodes of Nicholas of Zion, and that was a period of plague. In St. Nicholas of Myra's case, in the early 4th century, it was famine that they were dealing with. But he was also pretty good at doing miraculous things around any kind of death and destruction. Is that all right?
Thank you. And I just want to say that Professor Mart actually sings for Vespers. The choir sings a psalm, a hymn, a motet against pestilence every week since this has been going on.
Really?
Yes, every Sunday for Vespers they do that.
Wow.
Yes, he's wow.
I'll have to try and listen in where I can. That's amazing. There are a surprising number of, well, is it surprising? I don't know. A surprising number of hymns, medieval hymns to Nicholas. So again, he's one of the most popular saints to be set to music. Extraordinary, really. It's really interesting how he appeals to Christians in this period, and now, of course, through as Father Christmas. He obviously offers something that other saints don't, and I think it's that physical kind of the level of physical intervention in his life, that kind of effort that he seems to put in. Also, that thaumaturgic magical appearance thing that he can do. It's quite handy trick.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions, comments? to speak up. Bob, unmute yourself.
Elaine, what do you know about the transition of Saint Nicholas to Santa Claus, where his color changed?
So I don't know what early Dutch images of their Saint Nicholas look like, but whatever they look like, I suspect that's what was imported during the phase of immigration and the foundation of New Amsterdam. That was the night before Christmas picture book. I think he's definitely, I can't find my cursor. I think he's definitely white in that.
He got white, yeah.
He did get white. He got, in fact, he's so, let me just show you. He's so Grizzly Adams. Can you see him there? He's so Grizzly Adams, isn't he? Look how white he is, kind of ruddy, mountain man. You know, I taught a class on archives in the summer, and it was about silenced voices, not silent voices, but silenced voices in the archive, and how difficult it is to get hold of archives that don't reflect power and status, right? So how in racialized terms, archives tend to be very white. And I was talking about white immigration into America and the kind of white colonial enterprise. And I think, you know, some people find it really upsetting to think in those terms about kind of white supremacist foundations to, you know, parts of the nation. And my American history, I don't really want to say much more than that, because honestly, my American history is not great. But this is, you know, anything like this, isn't it? But Jesus, right?
Yeah,
Jesus, for example,
that's right.
Is an instance where the people in power are able to decide to determine how someone or something should be represented.
Yeah.
And so he should look not like that, let's put it that way, more like the reconstructions that we saw.
You're right.
Or even closer to the image in Bari itself, the figure that we just saw.
Yeah.
So it comes from its desire, isn't it? Its desire to have something look like you.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like an old kind of white guy with a giant beard, but just white, just white. Mm-hmm. And that, I think we're more conscious of that. I'm sure we are more conscious of that now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's an 18th, 19th century. Actually, it's earlier, because a lot of the images that we see in medieval manuscripts were of white St. Nicholases. When you see them, when you see Greek and Mediterranean style icons, you know, like the one I was showing you, he's definitely a bit darker, but his features are still predominantly, well, you know, like different. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you would say about that, but yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. He should be darker.
Yeah.
I'll stop share. And of course that Nast, did you all know about that before? That elfie Father Christmas by that Thomas Nast. Has anybody come across that before? I'd never, until I was doing research for this, I had not really come across that. And he's the same. He's based on the Night Before Christmas guy. So it was Moore who influenced Thomas Nast, who influenced all of the 20th century artists, especially the Coca-Cola guy.
This guy looks very mean, which all Thomas Nast's characters do. I wouldn't want to be visited by him.
Yeah, he does look mean. He does. And I think it's that thaumaturgic thing, that ability to come, you know, appear in places that allows him to be Father Christmas, right? He can be in many, many places simultaneously, and he can come down a chimney because he can walk on water. So he's a really good choice of present giver.
That's right. So I take,
You've gone.
Sorry, Bob.
Say it again, Bob.
Bob, sorry, I muted you, Bob. Can you unmute yourself? Sorry. Keep going.
there. I said, I take from this lecture the lesson that after all, Elaine Treharne says there is a Santa Claus.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. We managed to maintain that story in our house till our daughter was 11, which I think is
That's pretty good.
monumental lying, I think is one way of describing it.
Thank you, Elaine.
Okay.
Evelyn, have you anything to add here?
Yeah.
Say thank you again. This has been fabulous.
Oh,
Thank you.
Yeah,
it's
su-
fabulous, Elaine.
such a
Thank
pleasure. Well, you're welcome. It was very, very nice to revisit St. Nicholas, who I haven't worked on for many years, but who, as I think you know, I have this deep affection for. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity. And I've gone all blurry, like soft lighting. Lovely, perfect for the summer night.
You're looking very good, Elaine.
Okay.
All right, nice to see you all.
Nice to see you, Elaine.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Yeah, yeah.
Bye.
Can you tell us how to get your tweet on this?
So just go to Traharne, and I am tweeting until the 24th of December. So I did Winchester font today, and that went down very well.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.